Hi, my name is the one they pretended didn't exist. I walked into my brother's promotion party, and before I even reached my seat, I heard her, my sister-in-law, laughing, whispering, "The stinky country girl is here." And my brother? He looked at me, then turned away. Just like that. But what they didn't know was that the room they celebrated in, the company they toasted for, the job he just got promoted to, all of it was mine. They buried me with silence, with shame. But I didn't die. I watched them smile in a place I built, and I waited. Do you think they apologized? Do you think they ever even asked why I left in the first place? Or are you wondering what happened when they realized the truth? Because that moment, it came. And trust me, they heard it loud and clear. Now, before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this? And where are you right now? Drop it in the comments. Because after you hear this story, you might not see your family the same way again. I didn't expect a warm welcome, but I also didn't expect it to sting quite like that. The valet had barely pulled away with my car when I stepped onto the marble steps of the hotel. The air still held the weight of summer, thick, perfumed with jasmine, and hot enough to make my coat cling slightly to my arms. I should have taken it off, but part of me held on, maybe out of habit, maybe because the faint scent of home, the kind of home that doesn't come with a doorman, still lingered in its threads. Inside, the ballroom was polished to perfection. Soft jazz hummed overhead. People moved like they belonged, heels clicking with purpose, voices confident but rehearsed. It was the kind of space where the lighting made everyone look better than they felt. And I stood at the threshold, unannounced, unremarkable, unseen. Except I wasn't unseen, not for long. I made my way in slowly, keeping near the wall, like I always did. The round tables were dressed in white, with tiny floral centerpieces that tried too hard. I spotted familiar faces, some from family, some from photos. Everyone was there to celebrate my brother's big promotion. Vice president, finally. After all the dinners, all the networking, all the years of towing the company line. He stood near the front, drink in hand, shaking hands like he was born for it. Sharp suit, sharper smile. I stayed in the background. That's what I was best at. Being present without drawing attention. I didn't dress to impress. I didn't have anything to prove. I came because family shows up. I moved past the dessert table, pretending to consider a cookie I had no intention of eating, when I heard it, low, almost casual, but not quiet enough. "The stinky country girl is here." The words sliced right through the hum of conversation. Time slowed, like it does in those strange dreams when you're running but your legs won't move. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I knew that voice. My sister-in-law had always had a way of hiding cruelty inside a smile. There was a pause, then a soft snicker. Not just one, a few, controlled but not ashamed. I kept still. My fingertips pressed lightly into the tablecloth, anchoring me. My breath shortened, my chest pulled tight, but my face stayed neutral. It always does, because this wasn't the first time I'd heard it. Not the same words, but the same tone, the same dismissal. That's what people like her do. They don't confront you. They reduce you. Quietly, sharply, with just enough volume to wound without making a scene. And I've spent most of my life pretending I didn't hear. That old instinct kicked in again. Smile. Stay composed. Don't feed the fire. Don't give them anything to point at. But something in me shifted, slightly. Not enough to be seen, but enough to be felt. I finally looked toward my brother. He was watching. We made eye contact for a fraction of a second, and then he looked away. He turned his body, leaned into someone else's conversation, and pretended I wasn't there. There it was, not the insult. That was background noise. But his silence, it hit harder than I expected, like a punch I didn't brace for. Because he heard it, he knew, and he chose to let it happen. I didn't flinch, didn't cry. I've long since trained myself not to break in public. Instead, I stood there, holding the weight of it. The room didn't notice. Waiters moved gracefully with trays of champagne. Glasses clinked. A speech was starting in the corner. My sister-in-law adjusted her necklace, laughing like she hadn't just gutted me with a sentence. I realized then, again, but deeper, that my role in this family was never to be seen. It was to be tolerated, to be the one who doesn't cause problems, who lets things slide for the sake of peace. But peace wasn't mine. It was theirs. I stayed, not because I didn't have the option to leave, but because leaving would have been easy, and I didn't come here for easy. I came to remember, I came to watch, I came because there's something about being underestimated that gives you an edge, if you know how to use it. So I picked up a glass of water, walked past a table where someone gave me a polite nod, and stepped further into the room. Not deeper into the crowd, but further into the story I was about to change. No one in that room knew who I really was. Not yet. But they would. That was the moment I realized silence was no longer protecting me. It was protecting them. I kept walking. My shoes barely made a sound on the carpet, but each step felt heavier than the last. The echo of her words, "The stinky country girl is here," was still hanging somewhere between my shoulders. I didn't flinch when she said it, and I didn't cry after. But I felt it settle in my bones the way cold rain seeps through the seams of a coat. No one looked my way, not directly. I wasn't part of the clusters forming around wine glasses and staged congratulations. I passed a table where someone laughed just a little too loud, maybe to feel like they belonged more. Maybe they did. I adjusted the strap of my purse, more out of instinct than need, and kept my chin up. Not for their benefit, for mine. I wasn't here to cause a scene. I wasn't here to be noticed either. But I also wasn't going to disappear into the wallpaper. My eyes scanned the room, looking for a place to sit. Most tables were full, not crowded, just selected. People sitting with intention, with invitation. There were name cards, neatly printed, standing like little flags of belonging at every setting. I found the family table easily, right near the stage where my brother would soon give his speech. I didn't expect a front row seat, but I checked anyway. No card for me. I scanned the rest, table by table, name by name. Some I recognized, cousins, former neighbors, colleagues of his, with titles like regional and director next to their names. They were placed with care, with thought. My name was there, just not near them. It sat quietly on a small table in the back corner of the room, near the service corridor and the restrooms. I wouldn't have seen it at all if not for the staff member who approached me, gentle smile already in place. "Miss, I believe this is your seat," he said, gesturing with a soft hand. He wasn't rude. In fact, he was almost apologetic without saying anything wrong. But he knew, I knew, we both understood. They put me there on purpose. I walked to the seat like it didn't matter, like I wasn't sure where else I'd rather be. I thanked him quietly and pulled out the chair. The fabric was stiff. The centerpiece a smaller version than the others. A single glass of water waited at the place setting. No wine, no silver name card holder. Just a printed piece of paper folded in half. "S. Miller." I sat down. My knees touched the underside of the table. My back found the chair, but my heart didn't. From here, the stage looked like it belonged in a different event entirely. I could barely see my brother through the heads of people chatting and sipping champagne. No one looked my way long enough to feel guilty, or to wonder if I needed anything. I took a slow breath, let it out through my nose, told myself not to react. Told myself it was just a seat, just a chair, just one evening. That was the story I'd always told myself. Don't make it about you. Don't assume the worst. Don't start something. That ruins everything. That's what Mom used to whisper in the kitchen, hands busy with dishes. It's just easier to keep peace, Sarah. That kind of peace always had a price, and it was always paid by the quiet ones. I sat there in silence, fingers laced on my lap, as someone approached the table, an older cousin I hadn't seen in years. She wore a fitted blazer and that look people wear when they're trying to decide if you've let yourself go or aged gracefully. "Oh, wow," she said, her smile thin. "It's so nice you could make it. I didn't realize you were still around here." Still around here. The way she said it made me feel like I was part of a rumor that hadn't quite faded. Her tone was syrupy enough to pretend she meant well. Her eyes, though, held something sharper, curious, judging. I gave her the kind of smile people give when they don't want to lie, but can't afford to be honest. "Nice to see you too," I said, letting it sit there. She hovered for a beat, like she might say more, then slipped away toward a table with people she'd rather be seen next to. I turned back to my water, took a small sip, more for something to do than thirst. The chill of the glass helped anchor me. I could have stood up right then, left, driven home. But I stayed. I told myself it was for my brother, but deep down, I knew it wasn't just about him anymore. The applause started about 10 minutes later. A man in a gray suit introduced my brother, calling him a true leader and pillar of the company. People clapped like it was their job. I clapped too. My hands moved on time. My face remained composed. Inside, though, something tightened. I wasn't angry at the promotion. He worked for it. He earned it in his way. But as I watched the room respond to him like he was something more than just a man, like he was above reproach, it hit me. This wasn't one moment. This was a pattern. Not just tonight, not just this seat, but every time they'd subtly reminded me of my place. Every time silence was the currency that kept the family calm. Every polite dismissal. Every awkward smile pretending not to see. I told myself I could endure this for one night, but I didn't yet realize how much I had already endured for years. I stayed in that chair longer than I should have. After the applause faded and people drifted back into their conversations, the room grew louder again, but it no longer reached me the same way. Voices blurred into a steady hum, like traffic heard from inside a closed car. I sat still, hands folded, eyes forward, letting the noise wash past without pulling me in. My body felt tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. Not physical exhaustion, something deeper. The kind that settles when you've been bracing yourself for too long without even realizing it. I didn't leave, I just pulled back. That's always been my quiet skill. Being present without being involved. Watching instead of participating. It's how I learned to survive family gatherings without losing pieces of myself. Or at least, that's what I told myself it was. From my seat, I could see fragments of people. A woman leaning in to whisper something that made her friend laugh. A man straightening his tie before approaching my brother again, ready with another compliment. Everyone performing their part, confident in their place. I let my gaze drift to the edge of the room, where the lighting dimmed slightly and the carpet changed texture. Near the wall stood a small arrangement of flowers, white lilies. The scent reached me faintly when someone passed by, stirring the air. Lilies. My chest tightened before I understood why. That smell pulled me backward without asking permission. I was younger then, still believing effort would be noticed if I gave enough of it. I remembered standing in our old kitchen, sleeves rolled up, helping my mother pack meals late into the night. My brother was out with friends, chasing opportunities. I stayed behind, making sure things ran smoothly. Someone had said, half joking, You're the reliable one. We don't have to worry about you. It was meant as praise. It landed like a sentence. Years later, it looked different. Helping with bills when money was tight. Watching nieces and nephews when no one else could. Being the one who answered calls, who showed up early, who left last. No one asked if it cost me anything. They just assumed I could handle it. And I did, quietly. That became my role. The dependable one. The one who didn't need acknowledgement. The one who didn't rock the boat. I learned that keeping things calm kept me included, even if I stood on the margins. That role became my anchor. It held me close to the family, gave me a sense of belonging, and it asked for my dignity in return. I don't think I ever said this out loud before, not even to myself. But sitting there, tucked away near the back of a ballroom that celebrated everyone but me, I finally admitted it. I had hoped, just once, to be introduced with pride, not applauded, not praised, just acknowledged. This is my sister, nothing more. That hope always felt dangerous. Hope makes disappointment sharper. So I trained myself not to expect it. Told myself it was childish, that adults don't need validation. Still, the wanting stayed. A sudden burst of applause snapped me back. I blinked, the memory dissolving as the present rushed in. Someone had made a toast, glasses clinked, chairs scraped against the floor. The room felt brighter again, harsher. I was still in the same seat, still unseen. The contrast stung more than I expected. Past and present overlapped in a way that left no room for excuses. No softened edges, just clarity. This wasn't oversight. It never had been. For the first time, I didn't rush to justify it. Didn't tell myself they meant well. Didn't minimize my own reaction. The thing I'd carried for years, the role, the silence, the patience, it wasn't grounding me anymore. It felt heavy, like something tied around my ankle, keeping me exactly where they were comfortable having me. That was when I started to wonder if staying silent had stopped being loyalty and started becoming self-erasure. I shifted in my chair, feeling the stiff fabric press against the backs of my legs. The cushion beneath me had long gone flat, and even though the room was full, it felt as if the walls were folding in, inch by inch. I needed air, not to escape, just to breathe somewhere I wasn't being watched or ignored. Somewhere I could exist without having to play a role. I stood up slowly, my movement unnoticed by most, and made my way toward the hallway outside the ballroom. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the polite applause faded behind me, replaced by the softer hush of distant pipes and muted footsteps. The corridor near the restrooms was dimmer, quieter. I leaned against the cool wall, letting my shoulders drop for the first time all evening. The silence there wasn't exactly peaceful, but it was honest. No pretending, no spotlights. Just muffled music from the ballroom and the faint hum of a vending machine around the corner. That's when I heard her voice. Polished, deliberate. The way someone speaks when they know they're being listened to. Except she didn't know I was standing right around the bend. My sister-in-law's tone was unmistakable. Warm on the outside, sharp underneath, like honey hiding a blade. "He's positioned perfectly now," she said. Another voice chimed in, deeper, male. One of her cousins, maybe. I recognized the cadence, but not the man. "He's in. The board trusts him. This opens doors for all of us, if we play it right." I froze, not in panic, but in focus. They didn't pause. They didn't lower their voices. Why would they? As far as they knew, no one was listening. "It's not just about his title," she continued. "It's access. Her side of the family owns that land. She doesn't even know what it's worth. That could become part of our leverage. If she signs off, even halfway—" A laugh. "You really think she'll go along with it? She's never said no before." I felt something twist inside my chest. Not heartbreak, not quite anger. Something older, something that had sat undisturbed for years, finally waking up. The seating, the whisper, the way she looked at me like I was inconvenient clutter she had to tolerate. None of it was random. I wasn't being overlooked. I was being managed. It all clicked into place with brutal clarity. I'd been cast in a role, familiar, submissive, silent, not because I was easy to ignore, but because it served them if I stayed that way. I leaned back from the wall slowly, careful not to let my heels tap against the floor. They kept talking, too casually to notice the tension their words had created just steps away. She's the weak link. Keep her in the loop just enough. Smile. Keep her grateful. I pressed my lips together to keep the heat in my throat from spilling out. I wanted to step around the corner, look her straight in the eye, and ask her to repeat every word. But I didn't. Not yet. Reacting now would only feed their narrative that I was emotional, reactive, unstable. No, I'd let them keep talking. I backed away, returning the way I came, footsteps steady. My mind, however, wasn't. I didn't need to hear more. I'd heard enough. Back in the ballroom, the lights felt brighter than before, or maybe I was seeing them differently. The tables looked the same, but the faces at them didn't. Everyone played their part so well, laughing, sipping, celebrating. And now I knew what was being celebrated. Not just a promotion, a maneuver, a consolidation of power. My brother stood near the stage, surrounded by congratulations. From across the room, he looked proud, unaware, or maybe not. I couldn't tell anymore. Maybe that's the worst part, never being sure who actually sees you and who just sees the space you're expected to fill. I walked back to my seat, that forgotten corner where they'd put me, and sat down with a kind of quiet precision. I wasn't angry in that moment. I was awake. I looked out across the room, noting how easily people were drawn to the performance of success, how quickly a suit and title could make someone appear trustworthy. They didn't see what I had heard, but I did, and now I couldn't unhear it. I went back to my seat, knowing one thing for certain. This wasn't just about how they saw me, it was about what they planned to take. I settled back into my seat with a stillness that didn't belong to the woman I was when I walked into that ballroom. Something inside me had shifted, less like a break, more like a quiet folding inward. My spine straightened, not out of pride, but defense. Arms rested neatly in my lap, fingers intertwined like I was holding something in. The room hadn't changed. The lights were dimmer now, soft and golden, casting everyone in a flattering glow. The music had eased into a lull. A server passed with flutes of champagne, conversations buzzed politely at every table. But I was somewhere else entirely. My eyes followed the way people moved toward my brother. Always him. He was laughing at something a colleague said, leaning in slightly, hand resting over his chest, the way he always did when he wanted to seem sincere. His smile was practiced but charming. I watched him closely, not with jealousy, but with a curiosity that bordered on mourning. He wasn't looking for me, not once since I came back from the hallway. He hadn't noticed I'd disappeared, or maybe he had, and he'd decided not to care. The MC stepped forward and tapped the mic. More speeches, more staged gratitude. And then my brother was called up again. Applause. Even I clapped quietly because I didn't know how not to. Old habits die soft. He took the microphone with ease. Thank you all. This night means everything. I listened, but not for the content. I listened for the tell, some hint that what I'd overheard meant nothing, that maybe I'd misunderstood. But then came the line that broke me, quiet and casual. I wouldn't be here without my supportive family, especially those who believed in me from the start. A few faces turned toward the front table. His wife's parents, her siblings, people who had whispered about power and position just moments ago. The clapping picked up again. I didn't move, couldn't. I just sat, not angry, not even hurt in the way I used to be. Just tired, like something inside me had finally given way. Not a collapse, more like surrender. My breath came in shallow pulls. I counted them, just to stay grounded. 1, 2, 3. I thought about standing up, walking out without looking back, just letting the door close behind me, let it all be what it was. Would anyone stop me? Would anyone even notice? The thought felt tempting, seductive even. Leave the room, leave the expectations, the manipulation, the small seat near the back of the room. I stared at the tablecloth in front of me, tracing the embroidery with my fingertip. In my head, I drafted the goodbye I wouldn't say aloud. It's fine, it's just one night. Don't make it a thing. Family's messy. They didn't mean it like that. I'd said all those things before, over and over, until I'd worn them like a second skin. Maybe that was the hardest part. I almost believed them again. Almost. But then a question slipped through the cracks of my carefully rehearsed detachment. If I leave now, who does that protect? And I knew, not me, them. It would let them go home and say, she was always distant, or she didn't want to be part of things. They'd talk about my absence like it was proof of something broken in me, not in them. Walking out would give them exactly what they wanted. No mess, no scene, no reckoning. And so I stayed. Not because I didn't want to leave, not because I didn't deserve better, but because I hadn't yet decided what kind of strength I was willing to become. The speeches ended, glasses clinked, laughter rose again. The night went on like nothing had cracked beneath it. But I had, and that meant everything was about to change. I stayed seated, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. I wasn't shrinking anymore. I wasn't scanning for exits or reasons to excuse what I'd seen and heard. I was watching, but not to understand them. I'd understood enough. Now, I watched to see what they did when they thought no one was truly looking. My breath had steadied. My shoulders didn't sag like before. Something inside me had locked into place, like the trembling part of me had gone quiet. And what remained was sharper. I didn't feel powerful, not yet. But I did feel awake. The ballroom had begun to shift with the hour. The spotlight speeches were done. Now it was mingling, clinking glasses, nervous laughter, the phase of the night where people drank just enough to start talking like they meant it. I'd been through enough of these events to recognize the change in air. When small talk starts slipping into half-truths and polished smiles begin cracking just slightly. I watched my brother's wife flutter between circles of her people like a well-trained hostess. Her dress shimmered under the overhead lights, her voice always pitched politely, always performing. The ones surrounding her, her family, the friends she'd drawn in, grew more comfortable with each refill. Laughter came quicker, stories got bolder. That's when I heard it. I wasn't even straining to listen. I was simply still enough to catch the things people say when they assume the quiet ones don't count. "She's lucky they let her come tonight," a voice said with a chuckle too loud for the kind of joke it was trying to be. It belonged to one of her cousins. I remembered the thick eyeliner and red nails from earlier. I mean, not to be harsh, but come on. Another one laughed, lighter, more reserved. I thought she'd moved away or something. Or, what was it, took time off to find herself. The last phrase was said with a hand gesture, the kind that mocks without fully committing. It hung in the air like something sour. Then came the kicker, from her sister, the one who always gave me tight smiles like she was swallowing something unpleasant. It's sweet, though, that they still include her. That's what family does, right? Even when they don't bring much to the table. That was it. Not the harshest thing I'd ever heard. Not even the most cruel. but it was the most clarifying. Not bring much to the table. That's what I was now. A courtesy seat, a relic, a gesture. I stared ahead, not blinking, not reacting. My jaw didn't clench. My hands didn't curl into fists. Instead, a calm rolled over me like a tide going out. I thought about every moment I'd bitten my tongue, every dinner I left early, every holiday card I wrote when none came back. Every time I told myself, they don't mean it like that. Every moment I'd mistaken absence of confrontation for peace. Silence hadn't earned me grace. It hadn't protected me. It had made me invisible. And invisibility, I now realized, was a currency they'd been spending freely. I waited for the right moment, just enough silence in their conversation, just enough pause between laughter. Then I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm over. I simply walked the short distance, calm and deliberate, to the edge of their group. One of them glanced up, not expecting me to be that close. I smiled, not to be polite, but because I meant every word that followed. For the record, I said, steady and quiet, I've been supporting myself since I was 19, paid my way through school, paid off 2 mortgages, and I never once needed permission to be part of this family. It wasn't loud. The music still played. Someone dropped a fork a few tables away, but my words landed. I saw it in their posture, the subtle shift, the avoidance of eye contact, a small gulp from the cousin with the red nails. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. I turned and walked back to my seat. As I sat down again, I felt eyes on me. Not the room, just a few, the right ones. My sister-in-law, for one. Her gaze caught mine and held it for a second too long. There was no fury in her face, just calculation, a quiet kind of alertness, like someone who just realized the piece she assumed was off the board had just moved. Good. Let her feel that. Let them all feel that. I didn't want applause. I didn't want tears. I didn't even want an apology. All I wanted was for them to know. The version of me they'd learned to ignore wasn't sitting at that table anymore. I crossed my legs and leaned back slightly, not to relax, but to remain, present, aware, ready. Because once you start speaking, even just a sentence, even just one truth, you can't go back to pretending silence is safety. And I wasn't going back. Not now, not ever. There was no dramatic soundtrack in the background, no flash of lightning or sudden hush across the ballroom. Just me, sitting a little straighter, a little heavier in my chair, feeling the air shift. I knew that feeling well, the kind of quiet that's not silence, but strategy. I could feel it ripple out around me, like the subtle tightening of a net I hadn't agreed to step into. The room wasn't louder, but it was sharper. Conversations dipped when I passed, eyes flicked my way and then quickly slid off. Smiles stretched thinner, no longer warm, just rehearsed. They'd noticed. The moment I spoke back, just once, with calm, had been enough to signal that I wasn't going to stay where they put me. And they didn't like that. My sister-in-law had gone into motion almost immediately. I watched her float across the room, weaving through her carefully curated circles like a dancer in a routine she'd performed many times. Each stop was brief, each conversation tight-lipped. She wasn't making small talk, she was planting seeds. And they were blooming fast. Phones started appearing in hands like props in a play I'd seen before. Texts flew silently, heads tilted together in hushed closeness. People glanced toward me like I was a puzzle they were being asked to solve, except no one asked me for the missing pieces. I didn't move, I didn't flinch, but I knew the whisper network had been activated. It didn't take long. A man I vaguely recognized, someone who'd worked with my brother on and off, a tall guy with perfectly combed hair and that corporate, neutral concern tone, approached me near the refreshment table. I was reaching for a glass of water when he stepped beside me, casual, like he wasn't about to drop poison into the evening. "Hey," he started, soft smile. "Everything going okay tonight?" I nodded. Just fine." He hesitated like someone rehearsing the next line in his head. "I heard a few folks asking some questions," he said slowly, "about your time at the company. About, your contributions." I turned my head slightly, just enough to look at him fully. "My what?" "Nothing serious," he added quickly. "Just, some people were confused, thinking maybe you were, I don't know, more behind the scenes, or possibly misunderstanding some parts of the company's history. Not trying to stir anything, of course." Of course. It wasn't just condescending, it was calculated. The tone, the phrasing, the false concern. Designed to undermine me without making it look like they had. To place doubt in the air like a fog that clings no matter how clean the truth is. I knew that move. I'd seen it done to other women before, especially the ones who didn't smile enough or clap hard enough or step out of line with too much certainty. But now it was my turn. I took a sip of my water, calm, cool. I could have listed every project I'd helped launch, every crisis I'd fixed behind closed doors while someone else got the photo op. I could have pulled out receipts. But that's what they wanted, to see if I'd break form, get emotional, prove their whisper was right. So instead, I gave him a slow nod. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. He smiled, confused, probably expecting more, probably rehearsed for a defensive reaction, not quiet control. He nodded and walked away. I stood there a moment longer, watching the crowd swirl around me like a living current, and I thought, they think power is in the spotlight, in being the loudest voice at the table, in controlling the guest list. They have no idea. My leverage wasn't in this room. It wasn't in applause or flattery or proximity to those who posed for pictures near banners and logos. It was in the quiet spaces, the relationships they'd forgotten, the connections they didn't know I'd maintained, the quiet respect that can't be bought but shows up when it counts. They'd made one very big mistake. They thought because I didn't fight back loudly, I didn't have anything to fight with. And now, they were trying to bury me in doubt, hoping I'd fold, fade, slip out before dessert. But I wasn't going anywhere. The night moved toward its final stretch. The lights dimmed slightly around the edges of the room, casting everything in soft gold. An executive stepped up to the podium for a closing toast. His voice rang out, full of warmth and showmanship. "Let's raise a glass," he said, "to the people who made all this possible. To those who carried the load, lifted others, and kept the lights on, even when no one was watching." People clapped. Some stood. I stayed seated. Across the room, my sister-in-law beamed. She was glowing with pride, like she had orchestrated this entire evening. And maybe she had, but she didn't notice I was watching her. She didn't see the moment my eyes narrowed just slightly. Because while the room toasted the expected heroes, I made my decision. Not loud, not visible, but final. They'd spent all night trying to remind me of my place. What they hadn't realized was that while they were busy performing power, I'd already remembered where mine lived. And that's when I stood up. The final toast was beginning. A man in a tailored Navy suit took the mic, someone from corporate, I assumed, his voice rounding out the room with the kind of scripted charm only expensive coaching could buy. "To a night of legacy, growth, and family." Glasses were raised. Smiles widened. I moved quietly down the aisle, every step echoing a little louder in my ears than it probably did in the room. But I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. I wasn't even angry. What I felt was something sharper, cleaner, a kind of purpose that made fear irrelevant. He was mid-sentence when I reached the edge of the stage. I didn't interrupt him with volume. I waited until he finished his line. Then, in the pause between applause and the next breath, I leaned forward slightly and said, "Excuse me, may I say a few words?" He hesitated, looking toward someone off stage, probably my brother or his wife. But the ballroom had already quieted. Dozens of faces had already turned. He couldn't say no without making a scene bigger than mine would be. He handed me the microphone. I walked to the center of the platform, not rushed, not tentative. I looked out over the room. I didn't start with a joke. I didn't soften the moment. I didn't apologize for taking up time. "I know most of you know me as Daniel's sister," I said, my voice steady. "But tonight, I want to clarify who I actually am." You could hear the shift. Posture stiffened. Chairs creaked. Glasses stopped clinking. I'm not here as a +1 or a supportive relative. I'm here as a stakeholder, as a founding partner, as someone whose name appears, legally and historically, on more than a few of the documents that helped build what's being celebrated here tonight. I paused just long enough to let that land. No one spoke. I co-developed the early strategy that secured the first 3 contracts this company built its base on. I contributed to the property decisions, including this very hotel, and I hold a minority but protected share in the parent company's board. That means, for those who've forgotten or conveniently misremembered, I'm not just someone who showed up tonight. I belong here, contractually, legally, and by right. My brother's expression shifted first, eyes wide, mouth slightly parted. He looked like he wanted to say something, but couldn't figure out what words wouldn't make things worse. Across the room, my sister-in-law sat frozen, her smile locked like a wax figure in a heat wave. Her fingers clenched her wineglass tighter than necessary. She wasn't used to this kind of spotlight. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood still. I let the silence stretch, giving everyone time to absorb what I'd said. The same room that hadn't noticed me earlier now couldn't look away. Then came the counter. Of course it did. My sister-in-law rose from her seat and addressed the crowd. Her voice, sweet, pitched just right. "I think there may be a misunderstanding," she said, forcing a light laugh. "There's been so much evolution in the company, and sometimes memory, especially of early years, can get a little blurred." I turned slightly to face her. "Is that so?" I replied, pulling a folder from my bag. I'd brought it weeks ago, before I even knew what tonight would become. Some part of me must have already known. I opened it calmly. "Then let's look at a few things together." I read off names, dates, correspondences, email threads, signatures. I didn't explain. I presented, and she had nothing to say. Her family, seated nearby, leaned in as if distance could shield them. My brother didn't meet my eyes. The tension in the room cracked, not with shouts or outrage, but with disbelief. You could feel the tectonic plates shifting under the foundation they thought they'd built. Phones came out again, but this time it wasn't for whisper campaigns. People were Googling, texting someone higher up, trying to confirm what I'd just made public. I closed the folder and handed the mic back to the man who had offered it to me. He looked like he wasn't sure whether to thank me or find the nearest exit. I didn't wait for applause. There was none. Just that thick, electric hush that comes when everyone in a room realizes they'd bet on the wrong narrative. I didn't need their validation. They knew now. As I stepped off the stage, the air felt cooler, clearer. I didn't look for reactions. I didn't search for regret. Because this wasn't about making them sorry. It was about making sure they never forgot again. And they wouldn't. Not after tonight. The ballroom had all but emptied. What was once buzzing with laughter, glasses clinking, and false warmth now echoed with the soft shuffle of staff clearing tables, stacking chairs, resetting the space like nothing had happened. I stood just outside the doorway, leaning against a wall I once stood behind as an outsider. Tonight, though, I wasn't behind anything. I was in full view, and they saw me. But recognition doesn't feel like peace. It doesn't undo the years. It doesn't cradle the ache you've grown used to carrying. I stayed there a moment longer, letting the cool draft from the vent above pull the heat from my chest. My heels hurt, my shoulders ached, but I'd never felt more grounded in my skin. Then I heard footsteps, slower than usual, hesitant. Daniel. He stepped into view like a man approaching a line he wasn't sure he could cross. He looked older than just hours ago, like time had caught up with him in a single night. He didn't speak right away, neither did I. "I didn't know you were going to do that," he finally said, voice low. "I know," I answered. No sharpness, just fact. I don't know how we got here," he continued. "I didn't plan for any of this." I tilted my head slightly. "That's part of the problem, isn't it? You didn't plan, you just let it all happen." He looked down, hands in his pockets like he used to do when we were kids, and Dad caught him lying. "I didn't want to fight." "You didn't want discomfort?" I corrected. He nodded, barely. "I was tired," he said. "Running the company, keeping everything stable. It was just easier to let things go than stir up the past." I leaned against the opposite wall now, arms folded loosely. "And I became the past," he exhaled. "That wasn't fair to you." "No," I agreed. "It wasn't." He looked at me then, really looked. "I'm sorry." I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't offer him release, because I wasn't holding him captive anymore. "I believe you," I said, "but that doesn't fix it." He nodded again, slower this time. "I just thought, maybe it's not too late." I gave a small, almost tired smile. "Daniel, everything isn't broken because it fell apart tonight. It broke years ago. You just finally heard the sound." Before he could respond, we both heard a sharp click of heels. She appeared around the corner, lips tight, hair slightly out of place. Her posture tried to hold on to the grace she always wielded like a blade, but it faltered in the quiet of the hallway. "Can we talk?" she asked. I looked at her. No hatred, no rage, just stillness. "Briefly." She stepped forward but kept her distance. "I didn't mean for things to go this far." "You never do," I replied. "But they always do." She bit her lip. I thought you weren't interested in being involved anymore. That's what you told yourself, so it wouldn't feel like theft." Her jaw tightened. "I never said I didn't want a seat," I continued. "You just made sure there wasn't one left." There was no apology, not a real one. She wasn't there for that. She was there for salvage. "I know this puts us in a difficult spot." "No," I interrupted. "This puts you in a difficult spot. I'm clearer than I've ever been." I stepped closer, not threatening, but solid. "I'm not here to ruin anyone," I said. "I'm just done shrinking to fit rooms you designed to keep me out." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I turned to Daniel. "Here's what's going to happen. The ownership will stand. I won't fight you. I won't embarrass the family. But I will no longer be silent, and I will not give you the comfort of pretending none of this ever happened." He nodded slowly. "Understood." She looked away, blinking too fast. I walked past them both, toward the elevator. As the doors closed, neither of them moved to follow. Sometime later, maybe 20 minutes, or maybe an hour, I found myself in my office on the top floor. I hadn't planned on coming here, but my feet led me like they remembered something my heart hadn't caught up with yet. The lights were off. The city below pulsed with early morning hues, blues softening to gray, headlights giving way to sunrise. I sat at the edge of the couch, kicked off my shoes, and let my hands fall in my lap. Tonight didn't heal me. That kind of healing isn't loud, but it gave me something I hadn't had before: space. Room to breathe without flinching. Room to think without having to defend my right to do so. Power didn't fix the pain, but it gave me the option to stop hurting on someone else's schedule. I leaned back, head resting against the cushion, eyes on the skyline. I thought of Mom, of how much she saw but never said, of the silence she swallowed until it swallowed her. I thought of all the years I spent waiting for someone to notice what I gave, what I built, what I carried, and now they had. But the funny thing about being seen, it means less when you've already learned to live without it.